Good morning, good evening, and welcome to everyone across the planet. I'm Tony Lontes, and this is Poetry in Motion with Sony Singh. Before I introduce you to our amazing co-host, here's what you need to know. If you're listening today on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, or Twitter, please leave us a comment. If you're watching live on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel so you can hear and see more of Sony each and every week for the next 4 weeks. A reminder too that if you've missed the live show and you're watching this, the third in a series of 6, you can always catch up on the Tony TV channel, available on LG, Roku, and Samsung smart TVs across the planet, and the Tony TV app, as well as Binge Networks USA, Hero Go TV USA, and Sondra Networks USA. That's quite a mouthful. Now, before we do our welcome to country, I just want to pay another respectful mention to the passing of Her Majesty the Queen. Today in Australia is a public holiday and National Day of Mourning. And for those of you listening in the US, the Queen remains our head of state as we are part of a Commonwealth. So we now have a new king, King Charles III, and today is recognition of Queen Elizabeth and her 70-year reign over our Commonwealth. So it's important to acknowledge that that is a phenomenal accomplishment for a woman. So in line with that, I also want to do our welcome to country and respectfully acknowledge the people of the Yugambeh language region on the Gold Coast, Queensland, Australia, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and broadcast. And I want to pay my respect to the elders past and present and all Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander peoples here watching today. Now, as you know, this is the third in a series of 6 shows with international author Sony Singh. And before I introduce you to this gorgeous human, here's what you need to know. Sony is a cross-cultural seeker of deep knowing. She writes stories of self-discovery to encourage people to accept themselves for who they are and to live life on their own terms. And just that little sentence is a powerful reminder that there are people encouraging us to live our lives to the best of our ability, and Sony is one of those people. Her tales are of her characters in definitive moments on their life's journey. The mystical and spiritual are an integral part of her storytelling, and as is her multicultural background. Sony is of Indian descent, born in Mexico, raised in Colombia, resides in the United States, and is currently visiting Australia. When she's not traveling, reading and writing, she indulges in meditation, yoga, and aromatherapy. Sony's published 3 books in her Soul Seeker collection of poetry: Embody, Embrace, and Embolden. And her first novel, Lonely Dove, is so close to being released, and we get to chat about it next week. She's also been published in 3 anthologies, including Blessing the Page, The Colours of Me, and The Wishing Stone. Her first novel, Lonely Dove, will be released very soon, and we'll talk about that next week. Please jump onto Sony's website, sonysing.com, where you can see all about the books and Sony herself. She's also a speaker. Sony, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much, Tony, for that beautiful introduction. And I'm so pleased and honored to be here with you.
Sony and I are talking from complete opposite ends of Australia. So I'm on the eastern side, Sony's on the western side, and we are connected to the amazing team of BBS Radio TV in Texas in the US. So we are truly a global show. Now, this week, we get to talk about your first poetry book, Embody. And this also coincides with the release of the paperback version of the book. Yay! Oh, good, awesome!
I have to hold it in front of me.
So beautiful. They're so beautiful. Before we wanted to chat, I wanted to remind the audience just how these poetry books came to being and the story around the title of the book. Can you remind the audience, Sony, how they came to life and the story around the title of your first poetry book, Embody?
Absolutely. So I did not think I had it in me to write poetry. I've always been a reader of poetry and have appreciated it a lot. I started my writing career or my writing journey really with fiction, writing short stories and novels. And when COVID hit and we went into lockdown, particularly right at the beginning, I sort of especially embraced the process of self-reflection through writing, and I had that practice already. It was, something that I still do, in fact, every morning, just sort of writing out stream of consciousness.
Uh huh.
And when the pandemic hit, what I noticed is that a lot of what I was writing was very lyrical. And I sort of would go back to what I'd written and think, that sounds like a poem. And sure enough, I'd started taking it out into stanzas and rewriting it. And all of this is handwritten. And I'd rewrite it and realize, oh my gosh, I think I've written a poem. And once, once I opened myself
Amazing.
up to that, I know, just
What a
I what
gift.
it is a gift because it's not something that I intended. And once I realized I was doing that, poems just started coming to me. I would, it started with that ritual during that time, but then eventually, as I sort of just expanded kind of my awareness of, oh, look, I'm writing poems, they'd come in all sorts of places, times, while I was watching something on TV, while I was reading, in the shower, however it was, and I would just start writing them down.
I'm
And
laughing about the shower comment because often when you talk to creative people, ideas come in the shower. It's amazing,
it is. I think it's because you don't have anything else going on. I mean, it's just
except
you
being in
and
the
that
shower.
space. Yeah. And so it just sort of allows for this creativity. You're still in a way, I
Yeah,
mean, you're still sort of doing your thing, but I think that just allows for an openness of things to come through. So, yeah, so I realized I
wonderful.
started accumulating a lot of these poems, and I don't I think I said, oh, so I did start actually sharing some of them on social media,
Yes.
but just as a way of saying, here's some writing that I'm feeling kind of um, sort of pulled to put out there. But I didn't really have an intention of what I was going to do with them either. I just started collecting them. And so you asked me about the title Embody. What I realized when I was going back to looking at the poems that I'd written, they expressed a lot of emotion. I am not one to express emotion. I'm not the most emotive human being. And so the fact that it was coming out in my writing, one was extremely cathartic for me because it was a huge
Yes.
release. But I also realized that I was holding it within, like I was holding it in my body. And
Ah.
so as I was kind of going through different scenarios, aches and pains, whatever it was, it was the moment I started to write it down, a lot of it was just releasing and coming out of me. So
So
thus
that
embody.
like released the pain that you were feeling when you actually did the discipline of writing it down, because Sony, oftentimes we'll have things that come into our mind, but it actually takes a bit of discipline to stop and write what you're actually what's downloading into your mind, doesn't it?
It does. And it wasn't immediate, as in it wasn't
Ah.
necessarily that the release happened with the writing, but it was, I think, the openness of something's happening. And it seems like I'm gonna take this time of isolation to go
Uh-huh.
within. And I started realizing that I had, for instance, jaw pain because I was grinding my teeth from the anxiety or and I'm not also even
Yes.
an anxious person, but just in isolation, I started kind of doing this. And in writing, I was kind of called to write about what I was going through and express it. And that helped me bring awareness to what was happening in my body. And I think it was kind of a joint process of um, writing out what was happening, being in that moment, and then allowing
Mm.
it to come up. And once I opened that door, for instance, it was like a floodgates. I would, for instance, get into a yoga pose and all of a sudden just break down in tears because that particular pose drew
Wow.
something out of me, and then I'd go write it.
That's a beautiful story, Sony. It really is a beautiful story. And I'm hoping that there are millions more people like you that through COVID had a very spiritual journey, being shut down, being separated from family and friends. Of course, there was lots of trauma and grief associated, but it's wonderful to remind everyone that out of that very dark period of time, for you in particular, has come this beautiful gift.
Well, and I think it's important to also recognize that when we have these kinds of emotions, a lot of times, they get bigger because we don't express them, because we don't kind of sit with them and say, what is this about or what is this telling me? And this process really helped me come to terms with my feelings, and particularly for someone like me that prior to this
Yes.
wasn't very in touch with her feelings.
Yeah.
I'd push things down constantly. And so this really helped me heal in multiple levels. One, just to acknowledge that I had that emotion, but also just to
Aww.
allow the emotions to kind of run through my body and be released.
That's beautiful. And so you channeled these beautiful poems and you then started to think what you were going to do with them. I know you talked to the beautiful Karen McDermott from MMH, and there was a story on how the title of the first book of poems came about. Can you share this with the audience, Sony?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, as I was writing and the poetry was coming, I just started accumulating these pieces of paper. And sometimes they weren't even paper, sometimes they were napkins or whatever it
Oh, I
was
love
I had
that.
with me at the time. And so I just started collecting them. And I had met Karen McDermott at a Serenity Press because she has different kind of publishing arms. So I
Yes.
had met her at a retreat in Crum Castle in Ireland, the same one that you and I attended, but this was
Mm,
in 2019.
mm,
And we just kept in touch. We had a nice bond, and
yes.
she would reach out every once in a while. And so, and particularly during the pandemic. And so, I
Mm,
remember sharing with her saying, I've started writing poetry and I'm not really sure what to do with all of this.
yeah.
And then I showed her the stack of papers that I had of just accumulated poetry. And she just said to me, um, go through it, kind of collate it, pick
Mm,
your best 100 or so,
uh-huh.
and send them to me. And so I did. And in that process, as I was going through and typing, that's when I had the realization that so much of it was happening in my body. I mean, I didn't have
Yes.
that awareness before as I was writing. It was when I
Wow.
started transcribing the poems that I kept on thinking, like, oh, wow, look, all of these are things that are one I'm feeling, and I'm feeling them in different places in my body. And as
Mm,
we were discussing, it was Karen herself who said, embody. It
yes.
was kind of like as we were talking about the poems that the word came. And the moment she uttered it, I thought, this is
That's
perfect.
it.
This is
Yeah.
the correct
Yes.
representation of what this book of poetry is.
Yeah. Sony, this beautiful poetry that you've written, we can't talk about it without talking about that connection to spirituality and in particular balance, harmony with nature, those sort of concepts, they seem to link the poetry in this first book, don't they?
They do. And the thing is, I think it's important to note that we don't live in isolation. We are
Mm.
connected to what's happening. Um, for me, for instance, COVID was an opportunity. I mean, not COVID itself, but the lockdown and the isolation
Yes.
was an opportunity for introspection. And I think it
Mm.
was for anybody who was sort of paying attention or in that
Yeah, I agree.
mind frame. And so if you took that on, you started realizing that it's I wasn't it wasn't just me going through this. There were so many other people. I mean, we were all going through a
Mm.
kind of a shared experience.
Mm.
And that comes through the poetry, because I realized even though it was a very individual experience, it wasn't
Mm.
necessarily unique.
Yeah.
And in that isolation also, you'd notice things outside that you wouldn't
Uh-huh.
otherwise hear, birds that you wouldn't see otherwise.
Yes.
We could go out for walks outside, and I remember just that stillness, and all of a sudden you
Yes, and the
notice things.
quiet. There was quiet.
It
That's
was
what I
so
noticed.
quiet.
Like there was no traffic. The birds seemed louder. The sky seemed brighter. There was no traffic. The quiet. It was
Yes,
that was a really beautiful thing to come from that time.
it was. And so I had to capture it. I mean, it was part of
Mm.
what, part of the experience, part of what came through. And so a lot of it also is reflected in the poetry.
Yeah. One of the other things that you noticed as you were collating this collection of poems was there was also a distinct alignment with the body chakras. And you didn't realize until you were in that process of producing the poems and getting them together. So, can you tell us more about that process and how the poems align with the chakras? And then, for those that are unfamiliar with the chakras, can we talk a little bit about each of them?
Sure. Well, and the thing is with the chakras, they're energetic centers in our body.
Yes.
Uh, they all relate to different areas, facets, stages in our life.
Mm, mm,
And the chakras are something that I've kind of held in my consciousness for a long time.
yeah.
Uh, I work with them.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
familiar with them, and so
Mm,
it's in a way the best way to think about the chakras, and especially seeking alignment,
mm,
is kind of a natural progression, um, either through life, through
yeah.
phases of enlightenment, through just kind of being with ourselves. And so the first chakra, and there's 7 on the body, there's far more that
Yes.
are kind of beyond our auras, but I dealt
Yes.
specifically with the ones that are
On
in
the
our body.
body ones. Mm,
The first chakra, the root chakra, is
mm,
sort of where we sit down, kind of right
yes.
in
Right
our
on that spot. Yes.
and it deals with security, stability, our sense of being grounded, and
Ah.
it's sort of like where the energy starts in order for you to start feeling balanced, because you need that grounding in
Mm-hmm.
order for the energy to eventually kind of rise up in your body.
Mm-hmm.
The second chakra, which is the sacral chakra, is in our reproductive system, and it deals
Yes.
with our relations with our emotions, with
Mm-hmm.
creativity.
Yeah.
It is reproductive organ, so obviously it's
Mm,
creation, our
mm,
relations to other people.
mm.
And then you move up, and it's sort of your belly. I'm touching it, but you can't see.
Yes.
Uh,
I can actually feel that as soon as you said that I could actually feel it. Amazing.
and so this is the solar plexus
Yeah.
chakra, and it's all about our will, our sense of self,
Mm,
our sense of confidence. Um, we move up to the heart chakra, which is in between,
mm.
sort of the center of your body on your breastbone.
Yes.
And that one is the love center. And it's not
Yes.
just love in a romantic sense, but it's love
It's
from
compassion and
within, kindness, and our love to how we
yes.
extend it to other people.
Yeah.
Then you have the fifth chakra, which is on the throat. And this is all
Mm-hmm.
about expression, communication.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of creativity. And so,
Yeah.
it's sort of connected
And it's
to the
kind of
sacral,
close,
but it's
is close
being
to
able to
the
express.
heart. Yeah. Yeah.
It is. It is. And it's also about speaking from the heart.
Yes.
Um, and then we move up from there to the third eye, which is the
Hmm.
ajna. And
Yes.
that is our intuition, our connection sort of within.
Yeah.
And then finally, you have the crown chakra, which is in the top of the head.
Mm.
And that is our connection to sort of the
Our
higher consciousness.
purpose and higher consciousness.
Yeah.
Sony, I've always known that the chakras were related, that certain colors associated with those certain chakras. Can you explain to me why that is? How did, like, when I was doing the prep for the show last night, I'm thinking, I've always known that there are colors associated with the chakras, but I've never actually asked someone why that is or how the colors interact or relate to the chakras. Do you know?
So the chakras are, it's the color of the rainbow. It's essentially the rainbow. So the root chakra is the
Ah,
red. And then
yes,
you get into orange, yellow, green. And the heart is interesting because the heart is represented by two colors. It's green for the heart, for love. And then
yes.
there's a pink, which is kind of the deeper love. And then,
Oh,
it's like a light blue, a darker
yes.
blue, purple.
And the purple.
Um, yeah, and so all the colors, so the red, if you think about it, for
Mm,
instance, it is a grounding color. It comes from the earth. It
yes,
has that sort of uh, fiery ability, but it's earth driven versus
mm,
the purple, which is on the top of
yes,
your head. And that's why there's a gradation. Is
yeah,
what connects you to the heavens, to wisdom, to ancient wisdom, to higher wisdom.
yeah.
And so each of the colors is represented, not coincidentally, but the same colors as the rainbow.
Yeah, yeah. There's a whole range that we could talk about with the chakras. I just think that there's so much wisdom in the knowledge of those things and understanding that those different chakras or energy levels within the body can become blocked. Did you notice that there was an unblocking around certain chakras when you were going through this process with Embody?
Absolutely, and it was
Mm.
when I started realizing, and it was really at the time that I was transcribing it, when I started
Yeah.
realizing that I was so centered in my body, and so
Mhm.
that, like, the physical is part of the expression. It's not in every
Mm.
poem, but it's
Yeah,
definitely
yeah.
there. Because chakras is something that I have in my mind, in my
Mm.
consciousness, not necessarily in my mind, but I started recognizing that the poems connected one another, but also, they started with this: I have to have a sense of safety,
Mm.
because, I'm feeling uprooted. I'm feeling sort of kind of at
Because
wind.
it's a big thing to take your creative words and then progress them through and publish them and put them out to the public. That's massive for
It
many,
is.
many, many people.
And but that's when I started realizing that in grounding, for instance, which is all about the root chakra,
Mm.
that's when things started opening up, and I started realizing, a lot of what I was going through, not just in the writing, but as you said, in the publication process, it was starting with myself, then
Yeah.
sort of going up to the next chakra and looking at what's outside. How do I relate this to other people? How do
Mm.
I, essentially partner with other people or collaborate,
Yes.
getting my own self confidence, finding a love in that process,
Yeah.
expressing it, and
Yeah.
then, using that as my intuition to kind of help guide me through the whole process. So it's been a very interconnected experience: the writing, the
Mm.
chakras, the
Mm.
healing, and
Yes.
then even the publishing process.
Yes.
And interesting.
Amazing. Now, when we go back to talking about the book, the first book, Embody, was published as a hard copy, and
Mm-hmm.
and it is a
It is.
beautiful.
I don't know if you can see.
Look, it's. I hope you can see that, audience, because they're beautiful books. Like when I see them, I want to touch them. Like they're just beautiful. The writing, the way that they're set out, that there's oftentimes I speak to other readers about the energy around a book. And for some people, they talk about the desire to pick up a physical book and to feel it and hold it in their hands versus listening to an audiobook. And I know from being with Sonia and seeing and feeling and picking up and looking at her books, there is definitely an energy around Embolden. And so the first of the books was a beautiful hard copy coffee book that you can put on your coffee table and display. People can pick up and read through it. Beautiful book. But you've decided also to release Embody as a paperback. Now,
Yes,
it's equally beautiful. So
it is.
you're not going to tell the difference. But, Sony, what prompted you to then re-release as a paperback book?
Well, the only real difference is the size. I don't know if you can tell. This one is
Yes,
slightly
you,
smaller,
yeah.
and it's a glossy cover versus a matte. And so the coffee
Hmm.
table book is the matte version,
Yes,
and it's also in color. So there's a lot of illustrations
it's
inside and it's in
beautiful.
color.
Yeah.
And the soft cover, which is what we are releasing now, it's in black and
Today,
white. Yes, today. So,
Today you can get the paperback, people. Today the
so this is in
paperback's
black and
available.
white. And this was also to make it more accessible,
Mm-hmm.
the soft cover,
Yes,
because the hardcover is a beautiful book. It's
it
really
is.
what you would
It
think
is.
a collector's edition, whereas
Yes.
this soft cover is now the more accessible one.
Yeah.
We had it in Kindle or as an ebook as well, and people just wanted the hard copy, and so
I
that's
was
why
just
we.
going to say, Sonny, I can think of lots of books. When I think of your book, and I'm an avid reader as well, when I think of your book, it's one of those books I'm like, no, I have to have the physical. With Sony's poetry books, you have to have a physical because there's an energy around the beautiful writing within the book.
Yes, well, and that's why I think this one is now kind of the more accessible
Yeah.
option.
So, just so you know, audience, attached to the show notes will be the links to get the paperback book from now. You've also, of course, got the links to the hard copy, which I encourage you if you're after a beautiful coffee table book, this is one that you should. But if you also want to just get part of Sony's beautiful words and poetry, then the paperback is readily available from now, from today. Today it's released.
Yes,
Well done, Sonia, and congratulations. It's
thank
been
you.
quite a journey. And to see, I have to comment. So, Sonia and I have known each other for a little while now, probably about 12 months, maybe,
Mhm.
or so. And to see the growth in Sony as she's gone on this publishing journey. And yes, Sony was very much a quiet person, and she still is a beautiful, quiet, introverted soul for the most part. But now she's putting herself out into the public and talking more and talking with ease and grace and that beautiful grounded energy that Sony talks about. That's what you get when you meet Sony as well. So I encourage everyone to jump on the links. They'll be in the chat and underneath this show today so that you can jump on and get access to that paper book. Today is release day, so ready and available now. And I thought, as a celebration of this milestone, that we should get you, the author, to read one of your favorite poems from Embody.
It will be my pleasure. And the one thing that I should note is that yesterday actually marked the 1 year anniversary of Embody getting published to begin with.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yes,
See,
so we're celebrating a birthday as well
you
of the book.
actually have to think that that's an incredible journey. So, in that 12 months, it started with Embody, and you'll see in the coming weeks when we talk about Embrace, Embolden, and the new book, Lonely Dove. That's a lot of work for an author in 12 months. So well done, Sony.
Thank
Well
you.
done.
Thank you.
We have to celebrate. People are a bit blasé about celebrating milestones, but I know that that is an awful amount of beautiful creative work and energy that you've put into the world in the space of 12 months, and we should applaud that. Yeah?
Thank you so much. Yes. And it is quite an effort. I think part of the biggest
Absolutely.
effort is just getting over your own fears.
Definitely.
And, as you said, building confidence, but you have to start, from where you are
Yeah.
and embrace the journey as it goes. And so I do feel more confident now than I did, like even a year ago when the book
Uh,
first came out.
Absolutely.
I was hiding.
Absolutely. I can hear it.
Yeah, I was definitely hiding. And so for that reason, the poem that
Yes.
I've decided to read today actually is pretty emblematic of the journey that I
Mm.
took with what was happening at the time, but also the journey with this publishing or the publishing
Yes.
of these books. And so it's called For Whom. I moved here for whom? For me, because of whom? For my writing is of whom? For my social life revolves around whom? For my lifestyle colored by whom? For my solitude bare without whom? I moved here following a dream, a vision calling, traversed the country, a quieter city, more relaxed, opened up space, changed my lifestyle, healed my hurts, felt more whole, more in love, embodied me, moved here, search, and found myself.
Oh, beautiful. I know I didn't ask you about reading a second poem, but that one was so beautiful. Do you think you could indulge me with another one, Sony?
Sure. Let's see. I'm gonna do Spark.
Ah,
Spark. Balanced and relaxed connection. Create and design oracles. Express with calm feeling. Bake croissants from scratch. Exercise creativity in hobbies. Play a wooden flute. Explore interest and joy. Magical renditions through the lens. Discover the unknown. Gazing at stars in Atacama. Step strong into happiness. Read all the books I own. Natural in goodness. Donating what's not in use. Embrace what life is. One word at a time. Inner power lights the fire within, sparked from the universe.
oh, wow. Okay, so now I have questions. So the first poem I understand because you moved from, was it Texas that you moved, like the cities that you changed when
I
COVID
moved
struck?
from Charleston, South Carolina, to Idaho.
Yes, and so that was quite a big change for you, wasn't it?
It was, and the interesting thing was in the same year. So within a year, I moved
Mm.
from Seattle to Charleston to
Yes,
Idaho. I kind of went back and forth across the country. And part of it was so when I was moving from Seattle to Charleston, it was because I was being called to Charleston, and I felt like
yes,
that was going to be a good creative space for me, which it ended up being because most of these
yes,
poetry in the novel were born there.
yes, yeah,
But then after being in isolation for 4 months, I realized that for my own sake, and then for my parents' sake, we just needed to
yes,
be together. So I moved
mm-hmm,
in Idaho. So it
yeah,
was a period of a lot of movement, and because of that,
yes.
kind of feeling adrift. And so that first poem talks about this sort of
That,
back and
yes.
forth and how do I feel centered with all the changes that are going on.
Yeah. And in the second poem, Spark, you talked about some of the things that you would do. Like it gave me a visual of the different things that you were trying in that time. And a couple of those things were Oracle. So you're a card reader as well?
I am. I like tarot card readings, oracle card readings. I don't do it professionally. I just do it for
No,
myself, and I've
no.
got
Yes.
certification. But yes, it's something that I really enjoy, and in fact, incorporated a lot into my writing. Sometimes they show
Hmm.
up with different meaning, significance, and there's quite a lot of symbolism in a lot of them. So it's something I enjoy.
There is. Do you have a favorite Oracle card deck, like a go-to that is like the one that like I have lots of them, and I actually allow them to call to me. So today I'll
Hmm.
read Goddess, the Goddess cards. The next day it might be Angel cards. The next day it might be Fairy cards, and I've got ruins as well from my trip to Iceland. Are there particular ones that you go to or that have particular significance for you?
I'm like you in the sense that I have so many and I get
Yeah.
drawn to different ones at
Yes.
different points. But my usual go-to for, in fact, that I carry with me as I travel or
Uh-huh.
sort of rely on is the Rider Waite tarot card. So it's actual kind of your classic tarot cards. So those are
Oh.
the ones that I carry with me all the time. And I like it because you can either just take a quiet moment and pull one
Mm-hmm.
card or pull a
Mm-hmm.
few cards if you wanted to,
Mm-hmm.
or if wanted to indulge yourself, then you can do a full
A
reading.
five.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, which I don't do that often anymore. I did when I first started learning about them, but yeah,
Yeah.
they're for me a very good grounding mechanism. I mean, they really
Mm-hmm.
help me kind
Mm-hmm.
of feel centered, but in a way
Mm-hmm.
also as we're talking about chakras, then aligning the
Yes.
chakras and then feel kind of more connected to the spirits.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I also thinking about oracle cards, and I can't think of oracle cards without thinking about crystals. And I don't think I've actually asked you about crystals, Sony, and if that's part and parcel of your spiritual practices.
Absolutely. I carry
Yeah.
crystals again, even as I travel. One of the
Yes.
things, in fact, when I set up my cards, I organize the crystals, and I have a collection of crystals at home. So
Yeah.
when I travel with little ones. They're not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily the big ones, but they're the ones that help me feel. And it's interesting because they change for every trip. I sort of sit with them and say,
Yeah.
"Ooh, which ones are going to travel with me?" And I collect
Uh-huh.
them and off they go with me. But yeah, I set them up in my space, and that helps me feel that that space is more of my home, even though it's
Mm.
temporary, even if it's a hotel room or an Airbnb
Yeah.
or wherever I happen to be. And the cards, the tarot deck goes with them.
Yes. Ah, okay. So for me, I've always had crystals, even as far back as when my kids were little. My son collected rocks, as he called them, but they were crystals, and actually didn't occur to me until the last 12 months, even that those crystals and gems actually have an energy, and that energy is powerful for grounding, release, healing, clarity. There's a whole range. And I actually didn't consciously realize that there was energy associated with them. So if you pick the ones that travel with you, that energy travels with you and surrounds you. So I can actually see that that would create a safe space for you, even when you're traveling and in different hotel rooms across the world.
Absolutely. And the thing to note with crystals is that, I mean, essentially everything around us has energy.
Oh, yeah,
And crystals come from the earth, so they have
they
a
do.
particular grounding, and I mean they're ancient because it takes a
Yeah,
long time for a crystal to be
to
formed,
be
and
formed.
so they have that energy already, but they also conform to the energy of the people and the situations around them. And
Mm,
so sometimes it's they can be healing, and so they protect you.
mm,
They can help kind of magnify some of the energies that you're
yes.
feeling or wanting to express or whatever it is. And it's important actually to also set an intention with the crystals, so the crystals know kind of how to relate to you.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's just as simple as just sitting with it and holding it kind
Yes.
of in your hands and
Yes.
setting the
Yes.
intention with it.
Yes.
But in that sense, it's also important to clear them on a regular basis because otherwise they get kind of.
I did again something I've learnt in the last 18 months, not realizing that these beautiful crystals needed to be cleansed and cleared. So, what's your process for cleansing and clearing your
I
crystals, Sony?
I go with the moons,
Yes.
full
Yeah.
moons and new moons. I
Mm.
mean, full moons are really sort of the best time to do it, but
To
I do them
regenerate.
both.
Yeah.
And so I keep them sort of in the light and the night for 24 hours. So I will put them
Ah,
sort of
yes.
outdoors for a
Yes.
24-hour period. If I'm traveling and I don't have access to the outdoors, I'll put them on a windowsill for
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
24-hour period. And then when it's
Ah,
done, you set
they.
the intention of clearing them, but then reset the intention of what you want,
Hmm. Hmm.
what relation you want to have with your
Yeah.
crystals for
What
that.
a beautiful practice,
So,
Sony. Thank you for
mm,
sharing that with us. One of the other things that I heard in the poem Spark was where you spoke about the flute. Can you tell us about that? Because you associate flute playing is often associated with religious or spirituality practices. So I'm curious to know your experience with the flute over that COVID time.
Well, and the interesting thing is that it's actually not mine per se, but one of my
Hmm.
friends, she started picking up the flute. And so she used to play
Ah,
the flute before.
yes.
And when we were in the middle of lockdown, she has a collection, and these are wooden flutes that she's collected all
Oh,
over the US.
they would be
Uh, and
beautiful.
yeah, what was fascinating with that is she sometimes when we were speaking with each other because we had a set call every Monday night. She started playing them
Mm.
for me, and the sounds, the images that they evoked. I mean, it was really powerful and very profound. And so that's why it showed up in this poem as a spark connection with the universe.
Yeah.
All I did was listen. She was the
So
one who
you
played.
didn't learn to play, it was your friend that learnt to play, but it sparked something in you.
Yes, because I when I would hear her, I mean, in fact, I think I wrote it's not in Embody. It's in fact not been published yet, but I wrote a poem about all the images that came up in my
Yes.
mind as she
Yes.
changed flutes. So she would play one
Oh,
flute and I'd think
wow.
about Alaska, for instance, and it was just and she
Mm.
didn't intend for it. She just was playing it. And then
Mm.
she'd play another flute and I started thinking about Arizona and the mesas in Arizona.
Oh, yeah,
She
yeah.
did something else and I was in the jungle somewhere else. And these were all just things that would come to me as I listened to her. Uh,
Oh,
yeah, it was actually quite beautiful and quite profound. But for the next show, if you remind me, I will
yes, yes.
read it.
Okay, excellent. That would be amazing because they're also an ancient instrument, aren't
Mm-hmm.
they? They've been around for a very, very, very long time, and you can trace the history of flutes right back to the beginning of time, almost. And there's something about so the first flutes were like carved out of wood from trees, so they're very
Mm-hmm.
earthy and grounding in terms of their energy. But then the music that comes from that combination is really very special. And if people are actually listening to meditative music or scripts, the flute will feature often in that music, won't it?
It will. And the thing with flutes also is as you change the wood, and however the construction
I
of the
didn't
flute
know
is,
that.
it resonates with different frequencies, and the different frequencies affect the body in different ways. They affect different
Yes,
chakras, they affect your
yes,
emotions, they bring about healing.
yes,
And my friend who was playing these, Rebecca, she had the intention. She's a music teacher.
yes, yes.
I think she teaches guitar lessons.
Mm-hmm.
But she had the intention for these flutes to bring about healing without you even knowing. So she wanted to play the
I
flutes and
was
play the
just
songs.
going to
And
ask you that because
um,
we know scientifically, so this is not, this is outside of, the spiritual realm, but scientifically, certain level of hertz have different, which is sound, the level of sound, have defined and science backed effects on the body. So if you're wanting to heal, I think it's 438 is the healing hertz. The abundance hertz is like 888. So that's the sound of the music. So there's a powerful overarching concept here that we have at our fingertips a whole range of things to express, to create, and to heal our body. And they're, we don't consciously think about those things often enough. And I'm so glad that your friend did that for you, because now I can't wait to hear the poem next week. The other thing that occurred to me too, when I've been doing lots of reading around poetry, etc., in prep for our shows, and I noticed that often poetry is looked at as a feminine interest. Now, that's not to say that we don't have very wonderful and amazing male poets, but it is often a female interest, and it's perceived as a feminine activity. Have you found that, Sony, since you've started on the poetry writing path?
I mean, it's an interesting observation. I think once I
Yeah.
heard you say it, I thought, oh, well, I guess, it's true. And I think a lot of it is, traditionally, all writers, including poets, were men. And as
Yeah.
women have found their
Yes.
voice and as they're
Yes.
expressing their voice, poetry is sort of a natural way to do it, because I
Mm.
think the beauty of poetry is that it captures a snapshot. It
Yes.
captures a moment. It captures one little thing. You don't necessarily have to go into this long form of essays to just
Mm. Mm.
express what is going on in that particular moment. And I think it's become something that women have just embraced, because uh, it's
Absolutely.
an accessible way of
Yeah.
expression and receiving the
Yeah.
message from it.
Because I'm thinking of you, and then I'm thinking of the beautiful Kelly Van Nielsen,
Mhm.
and completely different styles, but equally powerful. And just for the audience, Kelly Van Nielsen, her poetry is powerful, isn't it, Sony?
It
It's
is. It is. And it's,
emotion evoking, it's
yes.
energy evoking, and it moves you on a level that is equally as powerful as Sony's, but it's different. So two female poets, modern day female poets, in very different realms, but doing poetry in a beautiful way.
And I think Kelly, and that's the thing with poetry in general, but Kelly has this beautiful way of
Oh
capturing
yeah.
action, almost aggression,
Yes.
and it expresses it in a way that really makes you feel like you really feel that you're carried in
Absolutely.
with
Absolutely.
her. Whereas, for instance, mine is a lot softer.
But equally beautiful and equally moving. So what I'm trying to say is, for any women in particular who are listening, or even the guys, like, guys can create amazing poetry. It's just that for women, and I keep saying this, we have been a little downtrodden for millennia, and we're waking up. And as we're waking up, we're starting to experience the beautiful creative words of different female poets, and that's a good thing for the world.
It is, because it also helps us feel that we're not alone. And I think
Mm.
that's the beauty of poetry, that you're just expressing, for instance, your life experience, your
Uh-huh.
perception, watching in that moment. But the likelihood that somebody else can connect with that is really high. And so it's
And it's
just a beautiful
important,
way of
Sony, isn't
expressing.
it? Like, it's important that people across the world don't feel alone. And if one of your poems connects to someone at a period of time where they're feeling alone, that's mind blowingly amazing, isn't it?
It is, and I think it sort of speaks to what we were talking about earlier, just finding the courage of expressing and sharing your voice.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because sometimes, and that was something that I had to learn. And, as I've
And I
grown
have
in
to agree. I have to
author,
agree. I've seen this beautiful evolution of Sony, and I'm so privileged to be able to share you with the world because I see into the future that there is a massive space there where your poetry will connect with people and start them on a healing and self discovery process and connect with them in a way that helps them. And that's all you ever want to do, is to actually be able to help another human through a moment of crisis or through a moment of healing or through a moment of understanding. But it takes courage, and I have to applaud Sony for the courage it takes to go from nothing and never written poetry before to writing, channeling, and producing beautiful poems. It's a tremendous amount of courage that it takes to step forward into the world. And people listening might think in the audience that, oh, yeah, everyone's doing it, everyone's writing a book, everyone, etc., etc. Well, no, they're not Sony. Only Sony can channel what's given to her. It's unique, it's precious, it's a gift, but it takes courage to release it to the world. Because once you release it to the world, you open yourself up to a whole range of things that for some people, they may feel that they're better off protected from. Yeah?
yeah, and that's the thing. I think capturing your uniqueness, and sometimes you feel like, oh, well, who's going to care what I have to say, or who's going to relate to
Someone
any of
will.
it? But somebody
Someone
will.
will.
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's important for us to get our voices out and express and share, because you never know how it can touch somebody. And sometimes I've
Absolutely.
gotten feedback that one particular poem really helped somebody in some way. And to me, it blows my mind, because all I
Yeah.
was doing was just, expressing what I
Writing
was
what was
going
given to
through.
you.
But somebody else just is able to take it and really take it on board. And some people have told
Yeah.
me that they printed my poems and put them
Yes,
on
and put
their
them on the
mirrors,
walls.
or
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
put them on
yeah.
the
That's
walls.
beautiful.
It's
Sony,
crazy.
you love to hear from people that have got your books and how the poems have affected
Oh,
them, don't you?
absolutely.
Like, you love to hear what people
Absolutely.
thought. You love to hear how that poem has helped, or what it has meant to them. Like, from a writer's perspective, that's the highest ideal, isn't it? For people
It
to
is.
give you feedback about what they're reading, and particularly your poems, which have such beautiful messages within them. I encourage you today, if you're watching this interview and you want to connect with Sony, please do. Please don't think that people don't want to hear from you, because we do, don't. Like, Sony, you
We do.
genuinely want to hear from people about how the poems have affected them and what they think. So I think that's a
Absolutely. I mean, any
wonderful
any
thing.
feedback is always, it's just such a blessing. It feels like, oh
Yes.
wow. I mean, I've either somebody connected with it in some way. So in a way, it makes you feel like all of the work that I've put out there has actually
Yeah.
now made sense. Like I can
Yes.
see sort of why I was able
Yes.
to get on this journey. And so yes, it's
Yeah.
beautiful. People share that.
And even has it, I say, even negative feedback is helpful as well, because it just highlights a human response, and it's probably got, I know that it's got nothing to do with Sony, but that poem is actually triggering a response in that person. So if there's negative feedback, that's triggering something, a response in that person, that at some stage, maybe not now, but at some stage, that will get them on a healing and growth journey, which is what they need, isn't it?
It is. And I think any response is still very
Yeah.
personal, whether it's a positive or a
Yes.
negative. People are going to look
Are
at it
people.
based on their own life, based on their own
Mm-hmm.
perspective. Obviously, they
Mm-hmm.
don't have minds, so they don't know how to interpret necessarily my experience. And that's not what sharing is about. Sharing is about the
Them.
person then reading it and their experience, and whether it's
Yeah.
positive or negative. I mean, the fact that it's creating some emotion is a good thing.
Is a good thing. It is really a good thing. Sony, as we close out the show today, I want to remind people that you have a beautiful website. It's sonysing.com. And the book, the paperback of Embody, is released today and it's available at MMH Press. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, IndieBond, and of course Sony's website, sonysing.com. Sony, thank you so much for coming on the show again today, in amongst all of your amazing travels. I look forward to our shows each week. We have beautiful conversations, and I'm so glad that I get to talk to you and share you with the world. Sony, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for being here at the launch of Embody.
Go
So
out and get that
very
paperback,
exciting.
people. Go out and
Yeah.
buy the book now. All right, we will be back next week to talk about another one of Sony's beautiful poetry books. Next week is the launch of her first novel. Another big show, another great conversation with Sony, and a very exciting time for us to share this space with Sony. This is Poetry in Motion. I'm your host, and the beautiful Sony Singh is my co host, and we will see you next week. Bye for now, everyone.
Bye.